Hello, everyone. I'm Hanil Zhang. I'm working as an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations in Kookmin University, Seoul. It's very honorable to be invited for a presentation of my research at Najayev University. So thank you so much for the invitation, Professor Go and the Korean Studies Center. Now I'm going to present my research here. Okay, wait a minute. I'm going to share the slide. Okay. Today, I'm going to present my paper, which was recently published at the Korean Political Science Review. It was co-authored with Professor Seungjin Jang at the same department. The paper studies partisan polarization in South Korea, as appeared in the title of the paper and this presentation. More specifically, throughout the presentation, I'm going to talk about impact of affective polarization on citizens' attitude in the non-political domain. As it will be clearer, affective polarization is one type of partisan polarization, and it focuses on affective or emotional divergence based on partisanship. This study was originally motivated by existing works on partisan polarization in United States, European countries, and South Korea. Around the 1990s, a number of scholars studying American politics began to report ideological polarization between Democratic and Republican parties at the elite levels in the United States. Since then, studies repeatedly find that the number of moderate congressmen has decreased, and ideological similarity between these two parties has decreased, but ideological homogeneity within each party has increased. Another group of studies examine whether or not ideological polarization among elites has any impact on citizens. What they find is relatively unclear compared to the elite polarization. Some studies find that citizens also become ideologically polarized, but others find that there has been no substantial changes in citizens' ideological distribution. That there is an important consensus regarding affective polarization among citizens in the United States. That is, affective evaluation toward the political elite or parties according to the partisanship become more polarized. Put differently, an affective gap between an in-group party and an out-group party increase. Compared to the past, partisans more love the party they support and more hate parties that they do not support. Then some scholars explore whether or not such affective polarization among partisan citizens prevail in other countries. And they find that it is actually the case. Meanwhile, other scholars examine whether or not affective polarization has any consequence in the non-political domain in the United States, which is closely related to the topic of this presentation. And they find that when choosing a date partner, hiring a business partner or employee, or selecting a scholarship recipient, a person with a higher degree of affective polarization tend to consider the partisanship of the candidate more seriously. In particular, some study already warned that the influence of affective polarization on non-political issue has already reached at a serious level by dehumanizing those who support other parties as intellectually or morally inferior. While studying affective polarization, I and my co-author was curious whether or not affective polarization would have similar impact in South Korea. So we asked, does affective polarization lead South Korean to discriminate others based on their partisanship? Another question that we sought to find the answer was related to the role of political knowledge, which is usually considered a positive component for democracy. Yet recent studies have reported that political knowledge contributes to the partisan bias. Thus, there is a possibility which has not yet explored. The possibility is political knowledge strengthens the impact of affective polarization on discriminative behavior in the non-political domain. As for the impact of affective polarization on discriminated behavior in the non-political domain, and the variation of the impact according to political knowledge in South Korea, we derive two hypotheses relying on the theory of motivating reasoning. According to this theory, directional goal and accuracy goals are activated when an individual processes new information. Accuracy goal lead people to review new information in a balanced manner to draw the best or accurate conclusion. On the contrary, directional goal lead people to review new information in a biased way that support or justifies existing belief and perspective. Partisanship is known to be one of the main drivers of a directional goal. So its impact on perception and attitudes are well documented in the literature. For example, partisanship influenced the evaluation of policy achievement, public service, electoral candidate and campaign, and presidential job performance. In addition, partisanship intervenes in the process of accepting information about medical recommendation, scientific discoveries, or even undeniable fact. At the same time, other studies suggested that even among partisans who support same party, people with a stronger affective bias toward the party is more likely to be engaged in motivated reasoning based on directional goal. This is because when an object has already been evaluated objectively, there is a stronger tendency to process newly acquired information on the object is in a consistent way with the pre-existing evaluation. So even if an individual identified with a particular party, motivated reasoning about new information will be relatively weak if the identification is not accompanied with a strong affective evaluation. This expectation is consistent with existing finding that affect toward the in-group party influence not only political attitude, such as political engagement and political trust, but also everyday social relationship that people maintain in the non-political domains. In South Korea, the policy and ideological difference between major political parties are based on historically structured political, social, and economic cleavage, which cannot be easily transformed by temporary campaign strategy or changes in party labels. Therefore, we believe that despite a relatively short history of a democracy, affective bias on partisanship would also matter in South Korea. So our first hypothesis is to be tested on South Koreans is that the stronger an individual relative effect toward an in-group party, the more likely he or she has discriminated attitude against the non-corporate partisans in the non-political domain. We also have the second hypothesis regarding political knowledge. We expect that the effect of affective polarization on discriminate attitude in the non-political domain will vary depending on the level of political knowledge. The reason is that individuals with greater political knowledge will be able to justify more easily their discriminatory attitude resulting from motivated reasoning induced by partisanship. To test these two hypotheses in South Korea, we use survey data collected right after the 21st National Assembly election in April 2020. Using 4 survey questions, we measure discriminatory behavior in the non-political domain and construct 3 types of dependent variables. The 4 questions ask respondents to indicate the degree of agreement to the following statement. The first statement is, as shown in this presented slide, it is uncomfortable to hold a social gathering with people who have a different political perspective from me. The second one is, it is important to have a politically similar opinion between lovers or couples to maintain their relationship. The third one is, one's level of intelligence affects which party he or she supports. The last one is, people who share similar political opinion with me are morally superior compared to those who do not. Since the third and fourth statements assume group superiority, unlike the other 2 questions, Unlike this first and second statement, we separately construct in-group favoritism and in-group superiority as the sum of response score to the first and second and the third and fourth questions, fourth statement, respectively. We also construct a more comprehensive variable called non-political bias, and its value is simply equivalent to the sum of response to all four questions. As for our independent variable, we measure a relative effect using a peeling thermometer question, which has been widely used in the literature of affective polarization. This question asks respondents to indicate their effect toward the two major parties, the Democratic Party and the United Future Party, between 0 and 10. Here, 0 is told to mean cold and negative feeling, whereas 10 means warm and positive feeling. Then, for supporters of a Democratic Party, we calculate a relative effect as feeling toward the Democratic Party minus feeling toward the United Future Party. For supporters of the Republican Party, a relative effect is calculated in the reverse way. Then we rescale a relative effect between 0 and 1 for easiness in the interpretation of regression coefficient. Another key variable for our analysis is political knowledge. And this variable is measured as the number of correct answers to 10 factual questions related to politics, such as the name of the prime minister and the party that won the second largest number of seats in the 21st National Assembly election. As I already told, the data come from the online survey conducted right after the 21st National Assembly election last year. Among 2,000, we have 2,000 respondents, but we analyzed only 882 respondents who self-identify with the Democratic Party or the United Future Party because of our research topic. We analyzed these partisan respondents using OLS regression models. In the model, we put a diverse set of control variables to control for the effect of demographic and political factors and regional variation. Now I'm going to graphically report the regression result. The first figure concerns hypothesis 1, which predicts the positive correlation between a relative effect and discriminated behavior in the non-political domain. The word along the y-axis indicate the variable name, and colored dot indicate estimated coefficient, and horizontal lines means horizontal lines penetrating the dot represent the 95% confidence intervals. The numbers on the x-axis are coefficient. As for the color of the dot, please recall that discriminated behavior is measured using 3 different types of dependent variables: in-group favoritism, in-group superiority, and non-political bias. In-group favoritism captures the degree of preference for people who share political perspective in social gathering and intimate relationship. Meanwhile, in-group superiority captures the degree of agreement on the superiority of co-partisans in terms of intelligence and morality. Finally, non-political bias is simply equivalent to the sum of in-group favoritism and in-group superiority. This figure clearly shows that a relative effect is positively correlated with discriminated behavior, regardless of how the behavior is measured, and the correlation is statistically significant. This result is consistent with the first hypothesis, although this hypothesis is irrelevant to the political knowledge. I just hope you to pay attention to the result that the coefficient on the political knowledge is statistically insignificant here. This one. Put differently, political knowledge itself does not affect discriminated behavior. Yet, the regression result on hypothesis 2 show that political knowledge play another role. In this figure, the x-axis represents the level of political knowledge or the number of correct answers to the 10 factual questions. And the dot indicate estimate coefficient, and vertical line penetrating the dot means the 95 confidence interval. This figure shows that political knowledge positively moderate the correlation between a relative effect and discriminatory behavior, regardless of how this behavior is measured. Among those whose political knowledge is low, there is no significant correlation. But as political knowledge increases, the correlation also increases and becomes statistically significant. As a consequence, the correlation becomes strongest among those who are most politically knowledgeable. Now I'm going to close my presentation after summarizing our findings and contribution and suggesting future studies. First, we find that like the United States, the degree of relative effect toward an in-group party is positively correlated with discriminatory behavior against non-co-partisans in the non-political domains in South Korea. To my best knowledge, there has been no study on the effect of affective polarization on such discriminatory behavior outside the United States. So I believe that our findings suggest that the non-political impact of affective polarization may be universal. Second, we also find that polarization political knowledge positively moderated the correlation, which is new to the literature of partisan polarization. We propose follow-up studies in a few directions. First, since we used observational data, only we use observational data, it was hard to determine whether or not affective polarization is the cause of discriminatory behavior in the non-political domain. Put differently, the reported correlation may simply reflect the reverse causality. In this vein, a survey experiment in which effect toward parties experiment manipulate will be able to provide more convincing evidence for the causal relationship. Second, we built up the theory based on motivated reasoning, but we failed to provide direct evidence for the activation of motivated reasoning based on directional goal, because of the limitation in data availability. So it is still required to detect such activation. Last, the third one, as I already told, the moderating role of political knowledge in the impact of affective polarization on discriminatory behavior is a new findings. Given that political knowledge has been considered to be a positive component for healthy citizenship in democracy, we needed to study whether or not the moderating role of political knowledge found in South Korea is observed in other countries. If this is the case, we may need to rethink about political knowledge regarding its role for democracy. Thank you for your listening to my presentation, and I hope to have another chance to visit you with your new study. Good. And also, if you have any question about my study, just send email. I will reply to your email. And thank you and goodbye.